Good evening. I think we're ready to start. Thank you, Sasha, for sending me the link again. Much appreciated. For tonight, we're talking about return to school planning for our Town Hall Elementary and talking about remote learning. And go ahead and go to the next slide, Sasha. So first of all, when we talk about K-5 remote school, I want to apologize for last night because I think our Board of Education meeting and all of the questioning really confused our remote parents. We were talking about, and I did send a follow-up letter today about that, we were talking about 3 different issues with staffing. And I think a lot of remote parents, what they heard was that they're going to have a high school graduate substitute teaching their children, and that is absolutely not the case. So I hope that when you got the letter today, it did help clarify that for many of you, because we would never do that with your children. So I always start on most of these town halls with the district task force, just because there can always be somebody who's brand new joining us. And this work has been ongoing all through the summer, where we've had a district task force looking at all different components. You know, the food service, we still have children who are going to be remote learners who are going to access, for instance, our food service program. So we need to make sure that we have that set up, and that information will get to you before the first day of school. We also have our remote learners who access special education, and we'll have a slide on that in just a minute. And it's very important that we make sure that those services are implemented as planned. We do have options, just like we did in the summer, for some of those related services to be offered face-to-face this year, which is going to be excellent. Go ahead and go on to the next slide, Sasha. And I do want to just note, some of you have started on the chat feature, which is down on the very bottom, is where the questions will be submitted for Q&A. And once we get through it, we have a couple of slides, not a whole bunch. We intend just to take a lot of questions tonight. So for our GPS remote leadership, we are structured where a principal is actually over a grade level. And we've done it this way because the way a kindergartner learns in a remote setting is very different than the way that, for instance, a 5th grader learns. Even the platforms that they use. Our K-1-2 are using Seesaw as a landing page. We found that was very effective at the end of last year to help them be more independent online. And Google Classroom is the basis for all of our K-5 this year. We think that's going to be a huge improvement. So each one of your grade levels, if you have 2 children or 3 children in remote, you have a different principal for each grade level. But we also feel like the principals, by focusing on one grade level, we can really get in and visit classrooms and really be focused to make sure that in our kindergarten classrooms, for instance, or 4th grade classrooms, that we're really meeting the standard of expectation. And again, this is going to be, we think, a huge help, not only for our principals, but just for remote parents to know there's somebody really helping to guide that we're doing what we need to do. So who answers questions during remote? And again, it's the same process that you would have if you were in a physical face-to-face school. You always start with the teacher, always. If the teacher can't answer your question, or perhaps it's something in the classroom that you're not comfortable sharing with the teacher, at that point, you would then call your remote assigned principal, because the remote principal is the one who's visiting those classrooms and keeping an eye on how things are progressing. Are teachers certified? Absolutely. I had several questions last night and today as well, just about certification. And I think part of that was the language that we use internally from our human resources department. And I know many of you have probably experienced where you've had a teacher in the classroom for a full year because somebody is out having a baby. That's what we call a long-term sub. That doesn't mean they're not highly qualified or certified. So we do have certified teachers with your children, and that's in remote and face-to-face. They must be certified, and that's by the state. When we look at staffing, remote school is a mixture of our existing Greenwich Public School staff who want to teach remote, and also new teachers to Greenwich Public Schools, just like our face-to-face buildings. We have teachers in Greenwich Public Schools who qualified to be remote, and so those teachers actually were put into the class rosters first. And then we have teachers who volunteered from our buildings that wanted to be remote. That was the next level. And we also have some new staff to Greenwich Public Schools. But again, this is no different than what you're going to see in a face-to-face situation. And every year, we always have some new teachers who join us. And it will be no different for remote or face-to-face. It's blend. When you look at the class size, this is a question that remote parents have asked. These are our class size guidelines for Greenwich Public Schools, and we will follow these as closely as we can. And I say as closely as we can because this is brand new for all of us. We have never held a remote school of this type, blending also with a face-to-face 11 elementaries. And we don't know how many parents are watching to see how our return to learn goes for the first 3 weeks and they want to come back to school. Or we may have parents who start, for instance, face-to-face, and then they decide they really want to go to remote. So we could have a class in kindergarten that bumps to 22 and because somebody else hasn't quite made up their mind. And we have seen quite a bit of back and forth from our remote parents. I would say this week it's quietened down a little bit, but we had on one weekend, I think it was 2 weekends ago, about 100 families changed their mind one way or the other. So it has been a challenge to keep up with that. But again, we're trying to stay with our class size guidelines. PTA involvement. This is something I think that's really important in Greenwich. We have a very active PTA, and some of the parents have reached out and have said they would like to have a class parent. Absolutely. There are so many things online and remotely that we can do to build community, to support the teachers. We absolutely welcome that. And I will be meeting with PTA, the council, I believe it's the end of this week. It's either this week or beginning of next week, and we will be sure to put that on our agenda, how that should be structured. The teachers will communicate with families frequently, just like your teachers always do. And the remote school principal will communicate as needed for special grade level activities, special events that students may want to join that are, for instance, just something happening for kindergartners. We will make sure that we keep that high level of involvement for everybody. So some of the questions have been about devices, and the students who are new to Greenwich Public Schools will receive that information to drive by and pick up a device at their neighborhood school. So the iPads will be issued from the neighborhood school, and kindergarten will be given a specific time to pick up their devices from their neighborhood school. Our technicians are working on all of that right now. Obviously, some of our iPads are being dropped off from our 5th graders, and they are resetting all of those to be ready for kindergarten. And if you are in one of our 3 buildings where they're having a refresh for the iPads, nobody will be asked to drop them off because they're all going to be new. Technical issues will go through the district support just like it did last spring. And again, when you get information in writing, that email will be there, and you'll want to be sure and keep it close at hand. And that's the portal_support at Greenwich. And we did this all the way from March through June and found that it was very, very supportive. We have a great tech team. Most of our issues we could turn around within the 24-hour period, whether that's the charging cord that broke or perhaps a key on or not a key, but iPad stopped working, not charging well. So we will be very responsive to those issues, just as we were last spring. Assessments. This is a question that a lot of parents asked at the end of last year. Again, this is it's new for everybody. And, as we went into the spring, some teachers did some assessments, some teachers didn't do any. We will have students taking some assessments from home. So looking at what is the rate of learning, for instance, from the end of last year. And students who are in a testing process, such as special education, they may come to the remote location if a parent prefers that on-site testing. And right now it's located at Havemeyer, and this could change as we get into the year, depending on the number of assessments and how many people would need to come on site. But again, we're working with each family individual on those types of unique assessments. And somebody asked about standardized tests recently from the Connecticut State Department of Education, and they have not determined for 2021. They have said that they are going to assess, but if the assessments are offered, they may require in-person testing, or they may be setting testing up where they're going to see how did the remote learners do, versus those students who are in face-to-face. We don't know yet, and I think they're really waiting to see how COVID evolves, what happens throughout the year, other than they have said they would like to test this year so that they have good data, at least from the situation that we're in with COVID. Again, special education and related services, all of our IEPs will be followed. If there is a challenge, it'll be worked through with the family. We want to be partners with our remote families. Again, our evaluations can be conducted in person at the district site, and parents may request some face-to-face related services if that works better for your student, your child. And it be operated very similar to how it was in the summer, where children would come for their amount of time. The parent would then pick the child up and take the child back home, and trying to do that with minimal contact, because we know a lot of our remote families are nervous about returning to school face-to-face. So that's one of the reasons it's being done at an offsite location, which is not as busy. It's not like having 500 children in a building. Our central office is much smaller as far as the number of people who would come in and out of this building. Mark, Mr. D'Amico, could you please address the schedule?
Sure. I want to take a step back, and I do want to acknowledge that I appreciate all of the emails that came in today from parents with questions about the remote school. And I really want to underscore that you are not an afterthought, that we've been spending time since the beginning of July identifying which pathways would be most appropriate for a full online remote school. The schedule is just one piece of that puzzle. And I also want to take a step back and just kind of put it in perspective. We are roughly 668 students strong in this school. And by way of comparison, our next largest elementary school is roughly 411 students. The overage, or the difference between those numbers, is larger than 4 of our elementary schools. So when you think about the scope of work necessary to build such a large school in a very non-traditional way, it did take a great deal of time. Do I think we're in a position where I would call it perfect? No. I don't know that I'll ever call it perfect, but we will continually refine the process and identify things that need to be brought to our attention by following that structure that Dr. Jones identified here. First going to your remote teacher, then going to your designated remote principal, who will liaison back to me, the academic team, so that we can provide the support needed so that your child and you feel comfortable in the experience that we're providing. Let's talk a little bit about the schedule. So whenever we made a decision about the remote school, we wanted to reflect back on lessons learned from the spring. It only made sense to listen to the things that worked well in the spring and address the things that didn't go well in the spring and make sure that we adjusted accordingly. Consistency in schedules was certainly something that was talked about a lot in the spring. And so what you'll notice here is we're going to present 2 different slides. The K2 class schedule slide that's on the screen now means that everyone who's in a remote classroom in K2 has the same schedule for consistency purposes. So if you happen to be a parent of a kindergartner and a 2nd grader, it's very easy for you to identify what your child is doing at what time of the day. And so we hope that consistency is helpful to you and supportive in being responsive to the feedback we heard in the spring. What you will notice is there is a large block of academic time throughout the morning, but before students start the academic work, there will be a morning meeting. And that's really important in building the community, even if it is in a virtual setting. We also have identified an opportunity for a break in the morning. That's that aquamarine color. And then again, a break in the afternoon for lunch and what we're calling recess. And we do hope that you'll let your children go outside and get some fresh air and run around. Our specials in the remote school are of the asynchronous nature, which means that we have staff who will be developing and placing into your child's Google Classroom videos that will identify a particular skill, why that skill is being taught, and then a demonstration of that skill for children then to replicate. But these are on demand. So if that's not a convenient time for your child, or you notice that after a long, intensive academic morning, they're tired, you can circle back to that. It's available. It's in the Google Classroom. And so that's the 1 o'clock block for the K2 students, but then they return for opportunities for intervention work and also opportunities to ask their teachers questions or to hand in work that might have been asked of them in the morning. And then the end of the day will be, or will mirror much the same of what we ask for in the morning, which is we want to make sure that children feel part of this classroom. And so we'll start our day with a morning meeting and we'll end our day with an interactive read aloud and a closing activity so that kids can build excitement, they can celebrate their successes for the day, and then build interest into tomorrow's learning. So that's the K2 schedule. If we switch the slides, you're not going to notice all that much of a difference. Really, the only difference in the 3 through 5 schedule, and again, all students 3 through 5 will have the same consistent schedule. The only difference is that we put the specials at the 2 o'clock slot. So if you have 2 children, they're breaking at basically the same time for snack. They're breaking for lunch and recess at the same time. Again, we heard you in the spring when you said it was difficult to manage multiple schedules where kids are on and off at different times. So we really tried to validate those concerns, remediate them in a way that provides very clear and consistent guidelines for parents to be supportive of their children in the remote school. Digital tools. Dr. Jones, you're on mute.
Yeah, this is just a slide we had before where we were talking about what is available. And I think I've already mentioned that the children will be in the Google Classroom. Again, you can see a emoji classroom, and that's just a landing page for a teacher. But we have a lot of digital tools. And Sasha, I don't know if the slide behind this one is actually there that has the list, but we actually tried to streamline. We've tried to streamline tools because what we did here last spring is that there were too many tools, and especially for younger children where they were trying to figure out how to click and get around. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning, Seesaw is a major tool for us in K1-2, and Google Classroom will be much more consistent. Last spring we had some classrooms, especially in 4th or 5th, that were actually still on Schoology. But again, remote school, everybody's on Google Classroom. So if you have 3 children, it will look much more similar this year than it did at the end of last year. And now we'll go ahead and we'll start some of the questions as they're coming in. So I think on the very first one, the size of the remote classroom. So that goes back to the class size guidance. The slide we had right at the very beginning, and we will stay as close to that as we can. And as far as switching out of live and back and forth, you'll have more detailed information that's coming on that. It will be a request that will go in on a Monday, and we have told families it could take up to 2 weeks. And of course, we're going to work as quickly as we can to make those changes, but we don't know what we don't know, in that there could be 300 requests on a Monday that people want to, for instance, go to remote or reverse, and it does take time to make sure that we can have the class set up, have a desk if you're coming back face to face. We need to make sure that everything is ready to go when your child arrives. How will OUT be handled in the remote school 3-5? Mark, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So originally, when we talked about the remote school, the question was asked, would it mirror the same cohorting method that was in school? Our original thinking was it would not, but we are trying to create the spirit of sameness as best as we can. So we are looking at the opportunity of creating 3 grade level ALP homerooms for all 3rd graders, for all 4th graders, and all 5th graders, with the intent of asking the ALP teacher to accommodate students who may not have been tested into the program. And the reason for that is, if a student, and we know there are parents who are very carefully watching our in-school return, and who are hoping to return their child to school sooner than later, we want to be able to make that transfer as seamless as possible. So by providing the same level of service in the remote school as we are providing in school, just seems to make more sense. So we are trying to finalize those details to make that happen.
Who's the contact for the district provided hotspots for internet? That goes back to the portal_support, and you would put in a request to that helpline. And again, we generally, if we have them in stock, we're able to get those turned around in 24 hours. So if you think that you need one now, and you can certainly email one of us and we can start working on that for you to have it before school starts. If you don't have that address, just email me and I will make sure that it gets to the right person. But again, those hotspots, we really do ask that it's for families that do not have that internet access, in their home. Will my son get to see a literacy specialist in remote learning as he would have in-person school? If you have an intervention, then yes, we're going to make sure that those are still provided for children. So again, it will be remote because our children are all remote. The protocol for reporting and resolving technical issues, I think we've addressed that one. You use that portal again to tell us what the issue is, and then we'll get it fixed for you. Are the remote students graduating from their remote school? We don't really graduate at this level, but they're considered part of their neighborhood school. They've made a different choice to learn at home right now. I mean, in our best case scenario, we're all back in school and there's an immunization and we can look back on this fall and say, oh my goodness, it's over. That's what we hope. So of course they're part of their neighborhood school. I'm concerned sorry, the question went too fast for me. I'm gonna scroll down to the bottom. When we'll be told about class lists and teachers, it probably the very end of the week, and which we've said all along, and our face-to-face have been like that as well. Obviously, understanding whether we're going to have 300, 400, 500, or 700 remote students in a matter of a few weeks has meant some resetting of classroom rosters. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. So what I want to say is we're working as quickly as we can for you. And we know everybody gets excited and anxious, but we're working as quickly as we can. Mark, I'll let you address how children can be evaluated for ALP. We're new to the district. And can you explain how that process works?
Sure. So students that are new to the district would simply send an email to Bonnie O'Regan, and Bonnie O'Regan would reach out to you to determine what's the best course of action for that testing, whether it would be at Havermeyer Building or whether we would be able to conduct that at a school setting, or if it's not comfortable at all for it to be in a person setting, whether we would do it remotely. But the point of contact for new students for ALP testing is our ALP coordinator, Bonnie O'Regan, and a simple email will suffice.
For Google Meets, they only allow a certain number of participants on the screen. How will the teacher be able to connect and see all of the students if there are 24 students in a particular grade? We've actually upgraded our whole Google account to the enterprise. And so they are going to be allowing more students than what they used to last spring. So that's all changing. And even the breakout rooms will be simpler. They say that's going to be released in early October, where it'll be even easier for the teachers to set up those breakout rooms. So that's one of the reasons we've gone with Google Enterprise, is to get more tools and resources for teachers. What level of parent involvement would be required for specials such as art, music, or PE? I think you might have answered that one, Mark. I don't know if you want to add anything else.
No, I would simply say, obviously, we have to think about it in a developmentally appropriate sense. So if it's a PE lesson and the PE teachers demonstrating an activity that is best suited to be outdoors, if it's a 5, 6, or 7-year-old, they probably need to be accompanied by a parent when they're outdoors under normal circumstances. So again, I would offer parents the opportunity to watch the beginning of the video and make that determination for themselves. We're obviously sensitive to the fact that if your child is watching a PE lesson indoors, but it requires movement, Again, that's another reason why we have it as an asynchronous opportunity, because they do need to then go outside and demonstrate those skills. But certainly there's not a lot of expectation in terms of parents teaching the lessons. They will be very self-explanatory, modeled by the teachers with a clear understanding of what the skill is and why we're asking them to do the task.
We need to be defining expectations for teachers, students, and parents. I think that for the teacher aspect, it's because face-to-face and remote are using the same platforms, the teachers understand if you're a remote teacher, which is how part of our teachers are starting out, not all of them, obviously. The remote teachers will be utilizing Google Meets. They know that at a minimum, it's 50% of live teaching. We want to be online with our children and really be balancing that. Again, I know there was a question on here also about screen time, balancing that so they also have little breaks. Let's have a 5-minute break or a 10-minute break and have a quiet read aloud, in your home environment, because we have to balance those two things carefully. I would say it was so challenging for so many of our families from March to June. And so thinking of doing this from September for some of our children who are going to do this all year, we're being very thoughtful about how we're approaching it. So yes, I think we're doing that even with the schedule that Mark just shared. It's very well defined, and it doesn't matter whether, you're in one school or the other and your child comes out for remote, what the schedule is going to look like. And so I think those expectations for parents will also be coming out. We want to make sure that parents understand, and especially those that are in remote school, that you should not be recording a teacher, that you should not be recording other children on the screen for, privacy reasons. Now, some of our teachers last spring worked with families, and we may have a child, for instance, that has speech, and the teacher has something that they're working on with the child, and they may have agreed to make a video of that so that the parent could practice with the child more at home. But it has to be a mutual partnership between the parent and the teacher when it comes to kind of online access and how we're working with families. So yes, you will get more information on that. How will learning gaps be addressed? Mark, do you want to speak to Link It? I mean, I can, but I think you've been working on that.
Sure. So our new data warehouse and assessment system is called Link It. And what we will be doing within the first few weeks of school is identifying opportunities for your students, for your children, to take what's called a Link It assessment. The Link It assessment in grades 2 through 5 will allow us to identify potential learning gaps. So if your child's a 4th grader, we would give them what was considered the end of 3rd grade Link It assessment, with the assumption that all 3rd grade content in that particular area, whether it be math or reading, was covered. Once we analyze the results of that, we can determine whether there were particular skills or objectives that were not mastered by your child. Hence, it then provides the teacher with a roadmap for remediation.
Thank you.
Yep.
My son has an IEP reading and math goals. How will regular and special education be balanced for mini lessons and independent work? And, I would say it really isn't any different than it is when you're in a face-to-face class. The two teachers must work together and, have perhaps one-on-one session, a small group working on the IEP goals, and then coming back in and joining the general education environment for another portion. And it's very individualized by child. And again, it will be working with the general education teacher and the special education teacher. Looking here. So for ALP, it seems like there could be some new families on here, and what ALP actually stands for. That's the Advanced Learner Program. In some school districts, they would call that a gifted program. So if you're a new parent and you weren't sure what that means. I'm just looking. How much support are the parents expected to provide to kindergarten students? Will there be a need for the parents to stay by the child's side throughout the school day, as this will be quite challenging for parents who are working full-time? And feel free to chime in, Mark. I think we're really working. We're trying to have a platform where they can be more independent. And the one thing that really helped last spring was that when we integrated the Seesaw platform, the teacher is able to have written directions on the screen, but then also easily have a button they can click and it will read those directions to the child. And we also have a lot more live this year. So you have to take those two pieces together. And I think it will be much better. But the reality is if you have a little one that's 7 or 8, you know, they need an adult. It's hard to leave them without an adult, whether they're at home or at school. But I don't think the level of instructional support is going to be like what it was last spring. We're working really hard, and we heard our parents loud and clear that they felt like, and many times, that they were the teacher. So we're trying not to have that happen this year. Mark, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'm smiling because I'm thinking back to my fondest memories are the first couple of weeks of school with 4.5 and 5-year-olds in kindergarten, knowing that you have to develop lessons that are highly engaging, but very short because their attention span isn't that long. But it's also developing routines and developing consistent expectations and building that endurance over time. So yes, parents, to a certain extent, for a 4.5 or 5-year-old, you will want to be close by, but know that from a developmental standpoint, we are trying to provide content that is highly engaging, but in small doses, so that your child isn't sitting for long periods of time, and that they can build that endurance over the over the time period of a few weeks. But even then, yes, you have to be realistic about the ability of a child to attend for an extended period of time. If your child was in a routine prior to COVID and they were in a preschool program and then they fell out of that routine, you probably noticed some behaviors start to emerge in terms of attention, ability to focus, sitting still, sustaining for a period of time. It will be the same thing when we start with the remote school, but teachers are sensitive and they're expecting that. So they will address that as needed and will support you as needed as well.
Somebody wants to know, is it true there's no instrumental music in elementary school this year? And for right now, the schedule is general music, and that really has to do with building the schedule, not from the remote side, from the face-to-face side, because we are bringing all of our students back. We have taken over spaces that would not normally be instructional spaces inside the building, which is impacting also the cohorting that they're doing. So we are using our music staff a little bit differently this year because of COVID. And again, we'll continue to watch this all year long. We just posted, for instance, in middle school, some after school virtual. And when we were remote last spring, we also partnered, I would say they partnered our Education Foundation, our Alliance, Greenwich Alliance, and we're able to do a lot of instrumental through virtual. So we'll continue to grow in that area because the decision was really more about the face-to-face where the challenges were than it was with remote. And it has to do with how we're utilizing the buildings.
And Dr. Jones, I might also add that there will be some instrumental pieces that children will do. They can do a lot of things with their voice, with clapping their hands, with tapping out rhythms on their desks. So that really is part of the instrumental learning that you have for students that are in music and are becoming, really interested in taking an instrument. That also will still be offered to children if they want to take an instrument, but we haven't quite figured out how that will occur. We're hoping that we get back to school so we won't have to worry about it, but we will start to think about that as we move forward.
Thank you, Dr. Carabola. She's a previous music teacher. Thank you for that. So who will be the point person for IEP students? This is usually the assistant principal. Most of our students who have their IEPs are still going to be attached to their home school because that's where the special education teachers are. And at that point that you would return, you would want to have the same person working with your children. So that is an element that doesn't change just because you're in remote. I'm trying to look for questions that we haven't answered.
While you're looking for additional questions, I want to go back a little bit to the 2 sample schedules that we shared. And I do think it's important for parents to be mindful of the fact that those are conceptual models that we expect students and teachers to grow into. So on the very first day of school, it very well may look a bit different in terms of the time constraints for each academic area. That would be true in a general ed setting, in an actual school setting as well. So the schedule students will grow into as they build that endurance. So you may see teachers being a little creative and flexible with adjusting content and set periods of time for content, but that doesn't mean we're not addressing all of the content. It simply means we're being responsive to the needs of the students in front of us. We always want to meet children where they're at and grow from there.
Somebody has a question about the training for all of our teachers, and are they provided professional development? Absolutely. And I would say this year, at least, I'll give credit to Mark and his team. I think we're getting feedback that it's some of the best professional development that they've had, and that a lot of it is on demand this year for teachers as well. So if they really were nervous and wanted to learn about some COVID information, they could spend time doing that and then start working on their Google Classroom setup. And the professional development is also, I think, has an accountability piece, and that's not meant to be a negative accountability, but in the sense that they're building something that they're going to use in their classroom. So when they finish their professional development, by the time they submit it, they're building something. And so it's not just somebody speaking at them, where you're learning this, you're trying to learn a new skill set and then you forget it. It's a continual build. So Mark, feel free to add to that. I think your team did a great job on setting the professional development for K-5, because they're all using the same tools, whether you're remote, again, or you're person to person. It's just remote will start using platforms like Seesaw a lot more often than our face-to-face.
Yeah, so we're a big school. The remote school is a large group of teachers, but it's important to remember that many of those teachers are experienced Greenwich Public Schools teachers. And so they've already started the professional learning process of developing and enhancing their skill set in Google Classroom and all of the digital tools that would be expected of a teacher in a remote learning setting. And also we're sensitive to the fact that we are hiring teachers towards the start of the school year, and we have a boot camp set up and ready to go for Tuesday, so that any brand new teacher to our district will have at their disposal the full academic team to walk them through all of the PD that is available. And again, since it's on demand, it also can be revisited throughout the first few weeks of school as a teacher acclimates themselves and grows within the skills of each digital tool.
Is there still time to sign up to be remote? There would be, but what we would ask, we know that some parents may get nervous about face-to-face, but we really ask for parents to be very thoughtful about when you're moving students back and forth. So information will be coming out about the change dates. I was just in a meeting about that yesterday, because it will be on Mondays, and there'll be a Monday date, which will be the first change date. So, but we don't want somebody to commit to remote for 4 weeks or 3 weeks and then come back face-to-face and then turn around and go right back to remote. Because when you come out of your remote class, somebody else is coming out of face-to-face, maybe very well be filling your spot. And we can't guarantee if you go back in face-to-face for 6 weeks and then you want to come out, that we can get you back with the same teacher or the same class. And I think that's important for you to know, simply because we don't know what the numbers will be. We're hoping it will be very stable, and people have been very thoughtful about their choices. But again, this is new for everybody. And in Connecticut, we couldn't say you must have a semester commitment. That's not how the State Department or the governor has set it up for us. So somebody was just asking why their choice should be the next marking period. Again, that's the legal advice from the state of Connecticut. And it has made it more difficult for school districts, absolutely, that are trying to do what we're doing. Dedicated mental health staff for remote learners. We are still, when you look at our K-5 team, we have dedicated people who are actually at even the district level. And so certainly they are connecting with special education teachers. If a principal knows that there's a child who needs assistance, we're going to reach out to make sure that happens. And that social emotional learning component is still very much a part, which Mark spoke to, on the schedule. So yes, if we need support, we will, just like we would if we were face to face, we will be able to do that. What is the relationship between the remote school student and the neighborhood school? Will they still receive neighborhood school communication, directory? If you absolutely are going to stay connected to your school and read the newsletters, and because we know that this is not something that we've set up to be forever, that this is a decision that's being, it's being driven by COVID, and we know this was a hard decision for families, and that everybody loves their schools and look forward to getting back in them. So we absolutely want you to stay, connected with the school, reading the school newsletters. If there's something virtually that the school happens to be doing, certainly you can join that. So we'll continue to work and refine, I'm sure, what we actually can do for our families. We want you to stay connected to your neighborhood school. Somebody's asking about if you're moving to Greenwich after the start date, is it possible to begin with before you have actually established residency? And that's a tough question. You're not, I wish I could say yes, but being enrolled in the school system means you have to go into our actual system that gets uploaded to the state. You become a Greenwich school student. And so in order to do that, and that's where the rosters are pulled from, that's where all of our platforms are connected to that informational system. And so until the paperwork is actually put forward, now we can process it very quickly. It's usually people who are waiting to close on a house or something of that nature, but you do have to have your residency paperwork, at least the basic, we know you're a resident of Greenwich. We have to have that done so that we can get you started. Opportunity for remote students to access the playgrounds. I think that during the day, that's almost impossible because our face-to-face students have to have their mask breaks outside. They have to have PE. We want outside as much as possible, as well as some learning spaces. So for remote students, it's more like accessing that just like you would on any other day, in the evenings or on the weekends. Now, the climbing equipment still remains closed. And that again is from the local Department of Health, although we're still trying to clarify some of that just this week and clarifying that with the Connecticut Department of Health at the state level. But it would be evenings and weekends right now, because obviously if you've chosen remote, you also don't want your children around a lot of other children that are, face-to-face, and they need to be able to social distance the children who are actually face-to-face in school. So how will subjects like IB, for instance, be taught? International Baccalaureate is tied to a magnet school, and remote is not a magnet school. So there are some elements like that that will not be available because you have a classroom where there might be 4 students or 3 students who are International Baccalaureate, and the rest of them are from a different school where they're not. And so that would be something that I would just encourage families. If you find there's a uniqueness to your magnet school, there's a lot of online opportunity to be able to continue and grow in that way, that it would have to be done independently. How would they be tested? I think we've addressed that one, how they're tested in ALP and English. Breakout sessions for students in special education, just like in person, again, yes. There's a great question here about the district being offered tutorials to parents on Google Classroom, and I actually wrote that down because that's something we really did want to do, and we will get some dates out, because our parents, when I actually met with PTA over the summer, they had talked about helping parents understand what is Google Classroom. And sorry, go ahead, Mark.
So we have been working behind the scenes to revamp our parent resource page on our website. Just waiting on a final okay to post it live, and it may even be posted now. I haven't actually taken a look at it, but we have been purposeful in developing content for parents for that exact reason.
And Mr. D'Amico, I'll confirm that it has been posted live, so I'll put in the link.
It's there.
Fantastic. There you go. Are lessons posted daily or weekly? I think you'll see a change there also. Last spring, it really depended on the school and it depended on the teacher. But when you're doing a lot of live teaching, also, you know, you can't put that in well ahead of time. So Mark, I don't know if you want to add to that for when they are doing asynchronous, if it's going to be, if they're planning to post, for instance, some of the specials, are they going to post them all on Monday? Or
yeah, so for asynchronous, our thought is to have everything in on Friday afternoon, and then we will post on Monday morning to have all the content refreshed for the week. That said, live instruction will be day to day, because obviously a teacher needs to interact with their students, see what types of responses and content they're receiving from the children in order to ascertain where the next lesson needs to go. So I think the biggest difference from the spring is it'll be day to day in terms of the academic planning. So each day when a child logs on, their academics for the day will be taught to them by their teacher rather than it being front loaded and posted. That's the biggest difference from the spring. It's going to be live instruction throughout the day.
So there's a question about if a child is at ISD and their principal's from another school, will that child still have some connection to their home school and or be completely disconnected? And I think we addressed most of that, but what I would add to the previous answer is that in our classes, there are clusters of children. So if there will be other, unless there just weren't any other, and I don't think we have that situation, there might have been 2 children in 4th grade from one building, there might be 12 children. So you would have anywhere from 2 to 6 other children that are from your home school inside your classroom. And if there were only 2 children that opted out, for instance, in 3rd grade, we would put those 2 children together. So at least there is a familiar face. And that happened across the district. A question about art, music in the remote school. I think the question is, are we having them live stream back into a teacher at a home building? And no, that's not the intent.
It's asynchronous.
Right.
Mark, maybe you want to share with the parents what maybe from the morning meeting until they have their snack break, what that might look like, so that they know that the children are not on the screen all the time, that they are going in and out with small groups, doing independent work, being able to take a break, get up and do something active.
So sure, I mean, we went through the schedule already. Do you feel like there's a need to go back to the schedule again at this point?
I think that parents are feeling as though they're going to be in front of the screen for the entire time that they are for spending their school day. And I think they have to know that there will be natural breaks during that day, that children will not be in front of the screen. And that's really what we need them for, to come and say, okay, it's time to come back to your class.
Yes, and there's also going to be independent practice where students do step away from the screen to do work for the teacher and then come back to the screen at a designated time.
And there's a question about who are remote teachers, and do parents get the option to request teachers like they do during a typical year? And the answer is no, we could not manage if we even tried to do that. First of all, even for remote, it's really looking at what grade level people are really comfortable on. You know, obviously you have teachers coming from all different buildings across the district, but we will have our children placed with a highly qualified, excellent teacher. Oh, procedure for dropping the kids off. Somebody's asking about if they're coming, I believe, for related services or some type of service. It would be very similar to how it was this summer. If you're doing anything face-to-face, parents need to have the questionnaire online. You don't have to submit it to us, but we ask that parents go through that to make sure that the child is not showing any symptoms. And depending on your child, what the activity is, they will work with you independently on where you would want to drop off a child. And I say that because it could be that your service is here at Havemeyer, and that's where the provider is, but it could be that your service is in a home school, and maybe it's a certain entry point, a certain entry door where that provider is going to meet you for speech. The child will come in, get the speech, and then leave. So again, that'll be working individually with families, depending on what you're requesting and the best way for us to provide that. Could there or would there be some occasional access to specialist teachers in the spring? Our art teacher gave asynchronous assignments but held grade level chats where the kids showed some of the work they did, particularly for art. This made a lot of sense. I think we can find a way to do some of that. Absolutely. I actually joined in some of the sing-alongs and just the wonderful things that were happening last spring. So we will work very hard to do as much as we can, because a lot of the schools, at least, even though we have students who are face-to-face, you find that a lot of what we learned from last spring is still existing. So, you know, we're still doing a lot of things online now, not necessarily because you have to, but because it's really efficient and it works well. And so I think having a Zoom sing-along, you know, for remote could be really fun. So some children are better at asking questions when they are confused than others. In a face-to-face setting, it is easier to pick up on the fact that a child is confused. Are teachers being trained to pick up on this in remote school? And I think we're working very hard to try and make sure that we have a great skill set. And I think part of that is just how you interact with the children online, and, you know, giving them the opportunity to be able to use a chat function depending on how old the child is, to ask a question that they may not want to ask them out loud. We did add our email system for elementary, so the child will have the opportunity, if they want, to email the teacher where they don't have to ask. And I'm thinking like a 4th or a 5th grader may want to ask for clarification. And this is an email that's inside Google. It's the Google Educational Suite. So children can't email, even their parent, they can't email outside our domain. It is just an instructional email. So we are being very thoughtful about how we communicate between the child and the teacher. Since the storm, many people in Greenwich are having spotty Wi-Fi, plus with everyone logging on at the same time, the system will be taxed. What happens if a child gets booted off the remote class and misses class content? You know, this is the reality of technology, and, you know, you hope that the internet providers are doing their jobs and making sure that everybody's internet works well. But we could have situations where a child misses part of a discussion, and we'll do the very best that we can to catch them up. And I will say, you know, in Greenwich, we're not unlike any other school system where sometimes children go to the restroom and they're gone for 5 or 10 minutes and they miss part of instruction. So we do the very best that we can to make sure that they get caught up. And if it means that, you know, a personal conversation or a one-on-one, you know, 5-10 minute tutorial, then that's what we'll have to do. We hope that the internet stays reliable. I know a lot of the providers learned a tremendous amount last spring and upped their systems, worked on their own infrastructure, because it wasn't only Google, Schoology, a lot of the platforms had times, because it's not just Greenwich that's pressing the World Wide Web, it is the world, and many districts that are utilizing online. How will specials be graded? Are specials optional? Mark, would you like to answer that?
Well, I think it's very important to specify that specials are not optional. We do expect children to participate to the fullest extent that they feel comfortable and that they're able to. And should they have some challenges with that, they should let their teacher know what those challenges are. Again, we're presenting a model for the very first time. And if we need to make refinements to that model, we will be certainly thoughtful about doing so. In terms of grading, the grading in art, music, and PE varies depending on your grade level.
How many kids per out class versus a standard size class? And it's the same class size guidelines. And it's interesting enough in Greenwich, I think it depends on what neighborhood school you're coming from, because the way that we have staffed out traditionally, you know, I hope Mark will study that a little bit for us, because we have put the same number of teachers in a building, regardless of whether there were 95 children in ALP or 20 children in ALP in another building, because we have buildings of vastly different sizes. So some of our ALP programs run much larger numbers and some run smaller. ALP for remote runs like our class size guidelines. Will there be homework? I think this is a question you could ask in a face-to-face classroom. Most teachers, I think, will, depending on the age level, may or may not give a lot of homework, because the schedule is a full schedule. So I think, yes, you'll find that they will do homework like they would if it was in face-to-face. But I think we also, again, I want to be very, very cognizant that we're balancing the amount of screen time, the type of the homework, because of the remote setting. This is a high school question, but obviously it's a parent that has an interest, so I'm going to go ahead and answer it. If your child is in remote school for Greenwich High School and they have an appointment for a physical that is after the official start date, can they still start? Yes, they can. And that was something that was actually clarified at the state level, because we also know, and the governor and the commissioner made it very clear that as long as you're a resident, you've got your residency papers in, if you're missing something like a doctor's appointment, the doctors have been very booked and difficult to get appointments because people are still being tested for COVID. A lot of them are doing the telemedicine. And so absolutely, if that's missing, the nurse will work with you at the school. For any materials needing to be printed, it would be helpful to get this the night before rather than the morning of, especially for working parents. And we can certainly convey that to teachers. And we know that a lot of people have printers, but our goal is also to not have parents printing so much. We heard that from our parents as well last year, that it was very taxing, just the amount of printing that some teachers were requiring. So trying to find flexibility and being able to draw and write in journals and aspects where you could actually do it with the teacher and not have to print quite so much. If the schools are closed, can we expect that remote learning will not take place that day as well? So remote learners will follow the same schedule we would if we were in face-to-face. When we take spring break for face-to-face school, you will have spring break for remote school. If, for instance, we have a whole school that needs to switch, and I'm just going to say one elementary needs to switch from face-to-face and go to full remote because there was, for instance, a couple of positive cases in the building, or one, and it happened to be a person that traveled all over the building when they were doing the contact tracing. It could take, we would send those children home to go full remote. It could need 1 day for the teachers to get their materials. So those children might be off. Remote would still be in session if that were the case, because there really wouldn't be a need for the day off for remote. If the schools are closed, okay, that one we just answered. Can parents of a special education student opt to postpone triennial testing? I would refer that to the special education department and to work with them on that aspect. Triennial testing by federal law is a parent's right, so there should not be an issue working with you on that. But again, you would want to work directly with the special education team.
Tony, I'm here.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't. Where are you, Mary?
Actually, I'm a mess because I just got back from horseback riding, so you're gonna have to just do with my voice.
Okay, I'm sorry, and I can't really see the screen because I'm reading all the questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, at your next meeting, you can plan the triennial, and if you want to plan the triennial for a later date, we can do that. We just need to meet to address the fact that we have talked about the triennial within a 3-year period. So we can postpone it, or we can do modified testing. Any one of those can be determined at the meeting.
What if you ordered school supplies and you are a remote learner? Will there be an opportunity to pick them up? Absolutely. And we'll make sure that that information gets out to you when you can do that. Sorry, this question was, I've asked 3 times. If there is no answer, just let me know, but I don't know what the question is. The questions are, I'm scrolling through the questions trying to find ones that we haven't answered. So for students who are enrolled in ESOL, what's the question? What's the schedule expectations? And again, that's going to look a lot like special education, where an ESOL teacher would remote in with those students. And we want to try to keep them as much as possible with homeschool ESOL also, just so that if you came back face-to-face, it's not a huge change for the children. And Spanish class, Mark, can you speak to Spanish?
So Spanish is going to be treated the same way as our asynchronous specials, where we will have one of our certified flex teachers build out content for our students in grades 3, 4, and 5.
How will remote students meet their teacher? Go ahead, Martin.
To be honest with you, we haven't figured that one out yet, and I don't want that to be an answer that makes people nervous.
Yeah.
It's on our list of things to do, and it will be communicated in the welcome back letter, so that there is definitely an opportunity. You know, we thought about this a few weeks ago, bringing students to a designated field and having the teacher come to that field. But you need to remember, the reason some of our teachers are designated for remote teaching is because they have a medical concern. And so we can't put people in that precarious of a situation. So it will be a virtual meet and greet, but we do have some ideas, and they will be communicated in that welcome letter that comes out to you with your class list and more information about the kickoff of the school year.
A parent has a question. It sounds like this is a parent that is a face-to-face parent, because they're asking about if somebody is positive in the school, how long would you know before, and that child is at home, how long would it take to notify, for instance, the class? From my experience, it's been very quick. The information, if somebody tests positive, it goes to the Department of Health, and they get that information very quickly. And then, by that, literally within hours, somebody is reaching out. And we had a little bit of that last spring, and it moves very quickly. And if you think about flu season, it's very similar process to what happens during flu season when we have an outbreak. Again, somebody was asking about the class list. I think we've answered that. We're working as quickly as we can. So I feel like we're being penalized for going remote, when in reality, because we have opted to go remote, it has allowed classes to actually take place in the schools. If we didn't choose remote, you'd have no space for all of the kids. Now it seems like we are getting less qualified teachers on top of it all. And again, I think Mark spoke to this earlier. That's absolutely not the case. And your spot in face-to-face is available in that classroom. And we held our classroom numbers lower so that, if you decide to opt back in, that you can come back and know that you can still socially distance inside your classroom. And there are definitely trade-offs to face-to-face and remote. And I think, as we were speaking to that earlier, the general music piece looks different back face-to-face. The way that lunches face-to-face is different, where children who are remote, obviously, their schedules have a little bit more flexibility. So there are definitely positives and negatives to what the choice is. Neither choice looks exactly like it would at the beginning of last year. And I know that's what we really all want to get back to, but we're trying to make this the very best experience we can for both groups, and they both have very unique needs. Somebody's asking again, I want opt out for my kid now, and how can I do that? I understand that the deadline has passed. If you email the same, if you go back into that same link, you can email. You just probably won't get a response until that next iteration goes out. But we will have to get, we would have to get your child set up in a remote class. And it's just finding the space, the grade level. So again, use that same link and you can let us know that you did before, that was available to you before. Will instructions for each school day and materials be printed, completed, included in the Google Classroom rather than emailed separately? Mark, can you speak to that based off the training that Lori has done?
I think it's going to be a combination of both, and to a certain extent, it's going to be based on the lessons that the teacher provides. But certainly we want to be sensitive to the fact that there are parents at home that do not have printers or access to materials. So we want to be very thoughtful about what we're asking students to produce. So in many cases, it will be something that's submitted electronically through their iPads.
So what is the plan for switching to hybrid or full remote if and when health conditions warrant? It's unlikely that in elementary we would switch to a hybrid simply because we have our class sizes set, we've maximized the buildings. I don't think the Department of Health, it's very different, for instance, than what we're dealing with at the high school with such a large population and no space, where elementary doesn't have those same challenges. To go full remote would mean the teachers are getting their materials, which is something we didn't have an opportunity to do last spring, getting all of their materials. They do have a laptop this year, where last spring they didn't even have that. They have, so they're ready to go. And I think we would probably, again, give them 24 hours, because when you get in your home environment, you need to get set up again. They may want to have a calendar behind them. They may want to have a certain setting, and we want to give them the opportunity to get set up. But we would be ready to go, because Google Classroom, again, is a remote platform, and it's a platform they're using in face-to-face. So from that perspective, it's not greatly different. You previously mentioned that spots are reserved with in-school classes for all of our kids in the event we decide to change our decision and go into school. Will you share with remote parents the in-person class list that our children are assigned to? Certainly, I don't think there's an issue with that, but we would need to talk about that. That's not a question somebody has asked before, because the only challenge would be if we're still having to balance, because we have students moving into the district and we need to move one child from one class to the other because they're really not physically present, and we're into November and we're having new students enroll. So, and when I say balance, our classes are balanced in the face-to-face by the number of ALP students, because we had to make sure that was balanced. You have alphabet to look at in case we went hybrid. So a tremendous amount of time goes into the balancing the list, but we certainly can discuss that. We just wouldn't want a parent to be thinking it was a certain teacher, but I need to vet that more. Mark, can you speak to ALP again and how that might look? We have quite a few questions just to understand the model. And this was really asking about, I think because people have watched the face-to-face meetings where they start with the morning meeting in a homeroom. And so I think the question really is, what does it look like online and remote?
So again, the idea is to have all third grade students who have been identified for ALP to have their own homeroom. So the ALP teacher will act as a homeroom teacher as well, and provide those morning meetings and end of day wrap-ups as well. So for continuity purposes, we felt that if a child is going to transfer at some point back into the brick and mortar setting, that this would provide the least level of disruption.
Yeah. Why did you decide against having a hybrid model for all but the high school? I believe there are many parents who've decided either to send their child to school or to do remote learning who would have preferred this option. You know, it's a great question, and it really comes down to could we afford to, not afford from an economic standpoint, but could we get our doors open in an environment where COVID is so low, and we're listening to the people who are experts about returning to school and saying that it should be a safe return for schools to open. And if we can put these certain requirements in, like social distancing and cohorting and having PPE, especially because the state of Connecticut requires masks, that's what we needed to do, because 82% of our parents wanted our doors open. And we've tried to be very responsive to the community. Hybrid also what we would do for hybrid. What we're doing for remote school, hybrid would look a little bit different because you only have half of the class, if we followed the high school model, in front of the teacher at one time. An eight-year-old actually on a webcam is pretty challenging, and it would be very difficult in an elementary environment, just even from the transitions, the amount of assistance that little children need. So it was not a model we thought was developmentally appropriate. But from the hybrid standpoint, it really is because we could open our doors and follow the requirements that we were expected to require, that we were expected to do. So can you confirm remote school will be offered for the entire school year, or is it a term-by-term basis to assess? So this is not actually a local decision, whether or not the remote school is all year. In Connecticut, we are not generally allowed to do remote learning at all, even like on a snow day. You know, the superintendents have asked, I think, for years for Connecticut to take action and allow us on snow days, especially when you get 4 or 5 snow days in a row, can't we do remote learning? Now we're hoping when we get through this COVID, maybe that will be a silver lining, and they will actually see that now we really could be doing that and keep kids learning. So the governor could, let's say the immunization comes out in November and they give a couple of months for everybody to get immunized. The governor could come out in March and call for a full return to school. And that would be his prerogative to do so, because we are under an executive order to operate in the way that we are right now. So we'll be watching that just as we did last year. I got new executive orders, new directions from the Connecticut State Department of Education. It felt like almost every other day. And I think just yesterday I got mask guidance, an addendum on how the mask guidance from the state, and it came out yesterday, and some school districts are already back in school. So again, this is something that will come from the state. When is the last day you can change your mind? The day that really, when school starts, again, we'll be putting those dates out when the change your mind dates are. But right now we are going with those families who opted for remote, and those families that opted for face-to-face, and we're planning for that. And so we will not be sending another large-scale survey out. If you're getting really nervous, I would encourage you to call the principal, talk to them about either what face-to-face looks like or what remote looks like, depending on what decision you're struggling with. But if you're feeling nervous, I would say you start with remote if you signed up for that, simply because coming in face-to-face and then coming back out again will also be disruptive for your child if you start doing that back and forth, because they're changing teachers when you do that. The Cost Cobb directory requires you to add a homeroom teacher. If we don't have one, how would we be found? So that's a question for the local elementary, and we can certainly follow that up for you when we pull the questions. And I don't know, Mark, is that the same for all elementaries? You might know that.
I'm not sure I understand the question, Tony.
They want the directory that comes from the elementary that has all the students, like information that the parents share. I think it's maybe through PTA.
Yeah, it's through the PTA.
Yeah.
So we could work with PTAC on a way to disseminate that information, I think.
Yeah, okay. Are you trying to keep kids in requested pods in the same classrooms? That's almost, it was almost impossible for us to do that. And we don't even know what all pods are out there. We had a couple of requests, and it has to do with balancing the classes even in remote. It's not easy to balance classes in remote. So we did not start taking personal requests, and we didn't face-to-face either. So that's applying to both. I think that someone's asking about the orientation. And again, I think, Mark, you spoke to that for parents, where there's a lot of information apparently, and Sasha confirmed it is online right now. Will students be expected to be on the screen 8:30 each day? And is this the end of the day now at 3? We are on a schedule this year, which is different than it was last spring. We're a little bit more flexible on time, and we heard our parents loud and clear that they wanted children on a schedule. So yes, they are on a schedule this year. And Mark, I don't know if you can speak to, without me looking at the schedule right in front of me, the start and end time on the actual schedule. Is it 8:30?
Yeah, we're 8:30 to 3, calling 3 o'clock dismissal. But obviously we wanted to provide an opportunity for parents to have access to teachers should they need them at the end of the day. But also it goes back to what you said. Parents very clearly asked for a schedule so that they knew exactly when their child needed to be online, so that they could put them to bed at a certain time, get them up at a certain time. And we hope that the consistency between the two schedules helps parents organizationally at home.
Thank you. I'm trying to look at where the newest questions are, or if we've answered most of them. Do you see any questions, Mark or Ann? Do we have new ones coming in right now?
I see a lot of repeats.
Yeah, it's, and I don't see any new questions coming in, but we'll wait just a minute more. I think one of the questions had to do with the 2-week waiting period. So if a student is remote and they're requesting to go back into the school, they would just stay. And if it took the 2 weeks because we have a high volume, then they would just stay in the remote classroom. If the child is face-to-face and the parent wants them home immediately, we're going to try to get them assigned, obviously, as quickly as possible. And then it would be treated more like you would on a week when a child is just sick and you're away from school. You could still connect with your teacher. The teacher could email you what the children were doing that week. But again, we're going to move as swiftly as we can, but this is really new. And we just don't know how challenging it will be because, again, just on the questions tonight, you can see there are some people who are still feeling uneasy about their decision. And we don't know within the first few weeks how many people are going to want to change one way or another. A question about flex days. Will there be flex days? There are not flex days built in at all. And again, that was listening to our families who really felt like for the vast majority of children, they needed them to be, they needed them on a schedule. They needed the routine. It was healthier for the children. But again, I think Mark's alluded to the way the specials are being run. You will have a little bit more flexibility in time in that regard, where it is on demand and you can work around your family's schedule. And I think that's going to be very helpful.
One of the questions, Dr. Jones, is can students use their own tablets for remote learning? And we would recommend that they do not, because they don't have the same number of apps that the school has, and they would not be able to access them on their own device.
Thank you, Ann. It sounded like you're using normal supply of subs for extra staffing, perhaps budget perspective. Do you think there's a risk that there won't be class coverage for face-to-face or remote teachers? We run that risk every single year. And in the spring especially, we run short of subs, and we do in November, December. We keep up with our sub fill rate, but on any given day, we can have 10% of our positions not filled. The difference is we mobilize somebody to go and cover the class, another teacher who has a planning period that can cover, an administrator that can cover. In COVID, it's going to be a little bit different because number one, the skill set for remote, a lot of daily subs, which are different than certified teachers, daily subs don't have the same skill set for remote teaching. And so, yes, we're gonna see how this develops. We do have a large sub pool right now because of the note that went out on Friday. We have to vet all of them. They have to get fingerprinted so that they can be used remote or face-to-face, but we have to also take them through training. And one of the teachers has just chimed in, Janine, thank you for that. And she just wants parents to know there are distinguished teachers among the remote staff. So thank you for that. Again, welcome back information is forthcoming. We're working on that as fast as we can.
Tony, I think it's also important to note that as we're bringing the teachers together and developing this teacher roster for the remote school, we will be planning time for each of those grade levels to have virtual grade level meetings so that they can share ideas, develop content, discuss what's working and what needs to be refined, working directly with the curriculum team for support. And again, We're doing school in a different way for the very first time, with actual intention, with levels of expectation that we haven't seen before. So as we come upon new problems, we're going to be problem solvers, and we will identify what the challenges are, and we will figure out ways to overcome them. But it's an exciting, but obviously a nervous time for many as well. I appreciate that.
Mhm.
If the entire district goes remote at some point, will remote kids be placed with their original school, or will they stay with the remote? They stay with the remote teacher. We're setting, again, I think Janine said it, you have some distinguished teachers, amazing teachers, and we don't want children jumping back and forth from teacher to teacher. So if we went full remote, the classes are set. And the children have also developed relationships by that point as well. And again, about having a chance to speak to the remote teacher, we're still working on what is the best way to do that keeps everybody feeling comfortable and safe, given that many of the remote families and staff prefer to be virtual in how they're meeting.
Tony, can I also add, because I think I saw a question about purchasing supply kits through the PTA and how would I get those? I want to emphasize to parents, and I've had multiple conversations with our 11 building principals, and they feel very strongly that they want to make sure you understand that you can pick up the phone and call them with questions that you normally would have had if you were coming into the school for a live teaching experience. So please don't feel like in any way you can't call your neighborhood principal and ask them questions about things like, how do I pick up my supplies? That connection starts on day one, and it should continue regardless of how long you stay in the remote learning school or how quickly you transition back.
Will there be a remote open house for parents to attend virtually? All of our open houses, whether face-to-face or remote school, are all virtual. So that will happen for everybody. There's a question about quarantining, and I think it's just as parents are thinking about going back and forth. If a class is quarantined from live, they will do remote with their teacher. Will they do remote with their teacher? If the health department tells the student's siblings to quarantine as well, how's that treated? How do they learn for those 14 days? It's going to be very similar to the way that it has been for decades. If it's only one child in one class in elementary, we're not webcamming into a classroom. So you would work independently with that teacher. And while the child is quarantining, they would send work home. You could pick up work, just like we do often again during flu season. And that's if it's one child. The contact tracing is done through the Department of Health. So if a student is having symptoms, or if they test positive within a family, then the siblings the health department would also send those siblings home to quarantine to watch for symptoms. And again, we work very closely with the Department of Health. We have nurses in our buildings that are well-trained and have been, working hard to be prepared for us to come back to school. I'm looking for if there are any new questions. And it just was asking about the devices. And I think I mentioned that about an hour ago, but for the students who are brand new to the district, we will let you know when you can come and pick up a device, kind of a drive-through sort of situation at the school. And if it's a fifth grader that's going into sixth, that's not necessarily a remote question, but you will have a drop-off time. If you haven't heard from your principal, there will be a drop-off time for you to drop that off at the school, so that you drop your iPad off, and then in middle school you will be getting, the children will be getting the laptops. Mark or Ann, are you seeing questions that we haven't answered?
The only question I see that keeps coming up is that they want to know if students will have textbooks or workbooks, and will they get the materials that they would have had when they were in the class. Sorry about that noise. My husband brought me in dinner, so I've been closing it off and eating a little bit because I was starved. So if there are physical books and workbooks, it's something that we have to discuss, because we know that there are going to be some reading books that we want students to be able to have, but we have to be very careful about how we are distributing books, because we have to make sure that they are clean before we do that.
How are you measuring student progress to ensure students and families have an accurate picture of student performance? Again, Mark referenced earlier, we have a brand new platform we're very excited about this year. It's called Link It, and I really think starting out the year, it's going to give us a really good level set about the rate of learning from last spring, and we'll be able to use this instructional tool throughout the year. And it drills down to the point that we can look at actually the standards where a student is struggling. Is it 2-digit addition? Is it 3-digit? You know, it's going to inform the instruction for the teacher so that they can differentiate, I think, at a greater level. And this is what our teachers have said that have seen this platform as well. We have a whole team of teachers who've been trained to be trainers for their building.
There's a question about paraprofessionals. Each one, it's Mary, each one of the special ed teachers assigned to remote learning will have 2 paraprofessionals assigned to them. So they will be working as a team with the students who are on their caseload.
I'm just scrolling through it. I think we've almost got through them. I'm just looking to see if there's as somebody was asking about art music from their homeschool. No, we are not actually webcamming back into homeschools in elementary. So the person they would see on the screen for art may or may not be their teacher, their normal teacher and their neighborhood teacher, and most likely not.
There's also a question about teams, SPED teams. Again, we just finalized the special education teachers today. They'll be getting their class list during this week, and they will be responsible for contacting the home schools of all the students. They can get into the IEP direct program and see the IEPs immediately, and then they will have conversations with the prior monitors to start the instruction. Anybody's annual review or PPT meetings will be continued to be held at the home school, and the person leading the meeting will be the assistant principal in that building.
And somebody's asking a question about middle school remote families having a town hall. I can certainly speak with the middle school principals. The differences in middle school and high school is the students follow their same schedule. They have the same teachers. So if they're at home, it's like they're physically present in the room. They don't have the same structure as we do in elementary. And if they come back in live, they go right back, they're on their schedule. And if they are at home, again, they're on the same schedule. A picture day. So, you know, there you go. Mark said yes. We will make sure your children get their pictures.
Yeah, I think it's important. Again, we've had countless conversations over the summer, the elementary principals and I, and we talked about picture day. Picture day is going to look different for everyone. There will not be the traditional class picture this fall. We are hopeful that the class picture could take place perhaps in the spring if we're in better circumstances, but individual student photos will be taken, and your home school, your neighborhood school will reach out to you so that there's a designated time for remote students to come on campus, because the pictures are going to be taken outside. You wouldn't be coming into the building. That's how we do class pictures anyhow, so that it's safe. To whatever extent you feel safe participating is your decision.
Somebody's asking about like author visits and things of that that happen at the schools, and will the remote students still be able to access some of that? I think it's going to be working really well with our elementary principals, and I have full confidence in Mr. D'Amico, because he's doing a great job leading that team. And if they have a special event at their school, it is so easy to actually stream in and allow children to participate in an author study. So we will do our very best to make sure that those experiences can exist like they would if children were in face-to-face for the remote.
Yeah, I would just add that it's important to remember we're not allowing visitors into our schools right now. So if there was an author visit at a school, it actually would be a virtual author's visit. So
Right.
there's no reason why we couldn't provide those opportunities in the remote school as well.
And I do have a parent who also has a high schooler. They want to know about the schedule if they're remote. They do follow their same high school schedule. If they're face-to-face, they follow their schedule. They have the same teachers. If they are at home, they do follow the same schedule, same teachers. And I will say the high school, by the end of this week, I actually saw the draft letter today. There's quite a bit of information that's going out to Greenwich High School just to help parents understand the nuances of, especially in face-to-face, how to drop off and do all of those things. But if you are remote, again, it's pretty fluid because there's no change to your schedule. And yes, students do stay in their classes. If we go full remote, the class that they begin the year is with, that will be their teacher. And how will the kids be evaluated? That goes back to that Linkit platform again. It's tied to the Common Core. It's tied to our Connecticut standards. And we instructionally I think we're in, again, a much better place than we even were last year with this platform to be able to help our educators. I think we answered the question about webcamming in for special events. So somebody's asking about ALP, and if you joined the school in January, weren't able to take all of the assessments. Mark, do you know where Miss O'Regan is in terms of getting through those spring testing?
So if there was a student who started testing but did not complete it, Mrs. O'Regan would be the point of contact if you haven't heard from her, or if the child is in the process of completing those tests, those will be completed by the end of this week. I would imagine, since we're starting school next week. But I also think it's important to note for new parents, we also will look at the results of the Linkit and the fall STAR assessment as screeners for potential entrance into the ALP program.
I have another statement, and thank you to Brian Peldunas. You can always count on PTA Council to do great work, and they are establishing, he's just sharing, they are going to establish a special committee to provide a conduit for remote school parents to raise concerns similar to the in-school PTA conduit. So thank you to PTA Council. How will lockdowns be done? That's really a face-to-face question, but again, it's children will not crouch in the corner. They will actually be told how that would work, and they will just be down beside the side of their desk. And again, our police are working with us on that. Our safety and security are working on that as well. I'm going to take 2 more questions if I see 1 or 2 new ones, and then I think I'll have to let the team let them go after an hour and a half. I know there are a lot of night meetings, and we have another one on Thursday, so I appreciate their participation tonight. Some 5th graders are, we've already answered that one. Music, art, and library, again, you will have that asynchronous will be provided to you. And there's a good library question about utilizing the library and books. Certainly, we can give that some thought, but we're not really utilizing the library in the way that we would normally use it, because once the children have their book boxes, it's only those books for that child because they've touched them. So the way we use books is very different. And I think you'll find that probably using the Greenwich Public Library system is better for you to be able to drop off and pick up books. I think I'm going to stop there, and I think we got most of them. We will go through these questions again tomorrow, and if there's something that we really missed, because it does move fast as people are submitting, we'll come back and see if we can answer that for you in Q&A. But again, thank you for joining us tonight. I hope that this was very helpful for our remote families, and I just want you to know that while this is new for all of us, we are incredibly committed to trying to have the best reentry based on whatever decision you made for your family about face-to-face or remote, and we respect everybody's decision to do what they believe is right for their family. So have a great night, and again, thank you for joining us tonight.